Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Reynolds, co-chair of the Gallery Council Program Committee, and I'm so glad you joined this presentation this morning. We have a great lineup coming up this year. You probably have gotten the brochure. And in just a minute, I'm going to introduce Catherine Page. We're going to do the first two sessions this year by Zoom, but by November, we hope to be in person. Please send me any ideas you have for the 22-23 year, because we're starting to get plans going for those. Now, I'd like to remind you to use the question and answer on your screen for Jonathan and Leslie, and I'm going to introduce Catherine Page, who will introduce them. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning. Jonathan Binstock is the Memorial Art Gallery's 7th director. He holds a master's degree and a PhD in the history of art from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And he has taught art history at the University of Michigan and the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to joining the Memorial Art Gallery, Jonathan was Senior Vice President for Modern and Contemporary Art in the Art Advisory and Finance Group of Citi Private Bank. He was Curator of Contemporary Art at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., as a colleague of Leslie Shaffer, and Assistant Curator at Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia. He lectures regularly in graduate seminars on art and cultural criticism at Columbia University. He is a peer reviewer for the U.S. General Services Administration's Art in Architecture program and a member of the Association of Art Museum Directors, and serves on the Board of Trustees of the American Federation of Arts. He is also executive champion for Sankofa, the University of Rochester's Networking Association for African American Staff, and he is the author and curator of numerous books and exhibitions. Leslie Shaffer currently serves as the executive director at the Delaware Contemporary in Wilmington, Delaware. She received her Master of Arts in Museology and Museum Studies at John F. Kennedy University in Berkeley, California, and her Bachelor of Arts in the History of Art and Architecture at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Prior to joining the Delaware Contemporary, Leslie directed Art Space in New Haven, Connecticut. She was the curator at the Contemporary Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, and a curator of education at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., as a colleague of Jonathan Binstock. She has held positions at Delaware College of Art and Design, Albertus Magnus College, and the Corcoran College of Art and Design, among others. As the former curator at the Delaware Contemporary, where Leslie was my boss, I'm delighted to introduce her to you today, as well as her former colleague and our executive director here at the Memorial Art Gallery. Please join me in welcoming these two esteemed colleagues.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. There's our friend Leslie, my old colleague. From now.
Thank you, Catherine. I will say that here in Wilmington, we are missing you. So it's nice to see you and your colleagues, your new colleagues now in Rochester. Jonathan, so wonderful to reconnect with you after so many years.
I know. We've had a couple of conversations now, and we're back in touch with each other, which is great. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
So for just a little bit of an introduction about what we'll be doing. Leslie and I agree that she would go first, and she would talk a little bit about the Delaware Contemporary, because many of us in Rochester may not be familiar with the Delaware Contemporary. I've visited numerous times, especially when I was living along the Eastern Seaboard in DC, Philadelphia, New York, and the like. It's just a few steps away from the Amtrak stop in Delaware, in Wilmington. So in any case, Leslie will introduce the Delaware Contemporary, tell us about her museum, and share with us whatever she wants to share with us. I'll then talk, because all of you really are very familiar with the Memorial Art Gallery. I'll come back on and talk a little bit about how COVID has affected MAG. And then we'll open it up. Leslie and I have questions for each other. You folks in the audience have the Q&A tab. At any time, please enter your questions into that tab. Leslie and I will be able to see them, and we will do our best to get to the questions as appropriate as we think they would fit in, or so forth and so on. So without further ado, let's turn to Leslie.
Thank you, Jonathan. So for those of you who have not visited Wilmington or the riverfront area of Wilmington, as Jonathan said, we're just a few steps away from the Amtrak train station, the Joseph Biden Amtrak train station. Sorry for the interruption, it's my phone here. The organization celebrated a couple of years ago our 40th anniversary. The organization for the first 20 years was almost exclusively run and managed by volunteers and by artists. And so when we moved into what is a fabricated, rehabbed old repair station on the riverfront in Wilmington, the organization began to hire professional staff to manage the programs and the exhibitions. And so the first 20 years were moving around town without a permanent location, being visible and invisible from time to time. And once we moved here about 2000, it really grounded the organization as a professional institution of contemporary art. And throughout the years with the various directors and curators, the program has taken many directions. When Catherine Page was here, and she did such a wonderful job for a number of years curating our exhibitions, the organization presented work from artists from all over the region, as well as the US and some international programs that she put together. More recently, in the last couple of years, due to COVID and other directions, we have been focusing primarily on artists living within a 250-ish mile range of Wilmington, to try to focus this as more of a regional East Coast museum. We are non-collecting. That is actually pretty significant because it enables us to do things and not do things that collecting organizations do. We have 7 exhibition spaces here in the museum. Those were all created from an open floor plan, so they're all constructed as new spaces within this shell, which is like I said, an old repair station. The exhibition schedule, I'll get into that a little bit more, has evolved over those 20 years from very academic kind of exhibitions to working with very emerging style artists. And so I think we've landed more on the emerging artist end at this point. And that has a lot to do with COVID. And I'll talk for a few minutes about that. But I did want to just follow up and say that we are operated by only about 15 staff members. So we're a small organization. Our annual budget is a little bit more than $1.2 million. We also house 26 artist studios here. On site at our museum, there are 6 on the first level and 20 on the second level are studios that are rented at a pretty reasonable rate to living artists. They don't live here, but they work here. So they're all artists that are living and working in the area and use our space to create new projects. Some artists have been in the studio since we opened in 2000, and there are artists that have been here about a month. So it's a revolving door of artists, and it gives us a lot of not just inspiration for new projects, but a lot of back and forth with what's happening on the ground level with artists today. It's really a pretty exciting program. For our organization, like a lot of organizations across the country, COVID hit in some key areas that really disabled our ability to do a lot of the things that we typically do. And I know, Jonathan, you'll probably get into more of your numbers, but for our institution, a big area of income is event rentals. We actually take in about 15% of that annual budget as income from private event rentals, weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever you might have here on site. And so with the closing of the museum and the social distancing, that went completely dark for the last 18 months. We're just starting this month to start to see a pickup in that. Fortunately, the artists were able to remain in their studio. We only lost a few artists renting the spaces during COVID, but that's an additional 15% of that. And then I'm sure, like you in Rochester, a lot of your income may come from fundraisers or special events that you produce to bring in those extra, very difficult operating dollars. So we struggled a bit with that. About 35% of our income went down just in events and programs. Something else that hit here, and I don't know if you're able to speak on your end, but the foundations, the funders in Wilmington, the big stakeholders here for the arts and culture, redirected a lot of their focus away from the arts and onto more housing and food, social service types, healthcare for those that were either already experiencing difficulty in those areas or were newly unemployed due to COVID. And so a lot of our funding that we counted on from year to year was also redirected, and we could no longer count on that for our programs. And so it created a bit of a problem for how we operate. At one point, I believe we were about 50% under budget of what we normally would. And so with that, we applied, as I'm sure you did, to every different kind of relief opportunity that we had. In the meantime, the conversations that were happening here were very difficult for our organization. Although we were 40 years here, although we had a proven track record of quality programming and exhibitions, the question of relevancy came into play for us. And within these bigger cultural arts organization meetings with foundations, and again, those stakeholders and board members of these different foundations said, why do we need 3 art museums? Which one of you should take the lead on being the arts? If we can't only sponsor one, which one of you is the most important in our region? Can you merge together? Can you 2 organizations just become one? And I think for us, we've always kind of tossed around the idea of working with other organizations in a more permanent way, but each institution brings with it different missions, and especially our surrounding area, the organizations of which they thought we might merge have permanent collections with collection focuses that don't really pair up so well with what we already do. So what our COVID battle was a fight to be relevant, a fight for our niche, a fight for proving why we were different and why we needed to remain operable in this time. And so I think that, we'll get into kind of maybe some of the benefits of it, but that's really where we ended up going. And so like every other organization, we moved quickly to a digital platform. I wanted to show one thing that we did that was very unique in our organization that helped, I think, establish our relevancy. And that was the introduction of a public art program. And the public art program obviously is outside in the public, but it took shape on the exterior of our space. And so let me turn it down a little bit, but you can see here, maybe in the background, a little bit of this. There we go. this is our space to give people a sense of what we look like. And on the exterior, it's just this large steel corrugated building that anchors our neighborhood, the riverfront neighborhood here in Wilmington. What you see alongside of us are financial buildings, AAA, and some residences. But we worked with a curator to come up with this plan to make our outside a very prominent art space, and renamed this the Platform Gallery. And it was something that people could see even from their cars. We did a drive-through opening in very early June 2020. This was probably shot the 1st of June before the governor allowed us to reopen to the public. And so for us, we showed that we could move forward very quickly and to continue to do projects while we were closed and still have a conversation with people while not being in person. And so I think projects like that are really important. I'll show you here one second. This is how close we are to the train station. And as such, not too many people were riding the train at this time, but if they did, or if they passed by on I-95, which millions of people do every year, they could take a look at one of our 3 banners. So you can see kind of the proximity of us to that train platform. So Jonathan, that's a little bit kind of about us. I'm sorry if I took too long on that.
Not at all. Thank you. That was great. Really interesting. It's nice to be reminded of the really cool facility that you have, and the building, and the energetic area right there in downtown Wilmington by the waterfront. It reminds me of how, in going back and forth, of course, from DC or to New York, which I did quite a bit, and back, always riding through Wilmington and looking out the window and seeing the Delaware Contemporary, thing, darn it, I want to go back there, or I should have scheduled some time to pop off the train and pop back on the train, which is very easy to do. But I did get to visit quite a bit, but I always felt like I was missing out when I didn't get to pop off the train.
I think it's not as easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a very visible, very high profile organization right there on the Northeast Corridor, and those were fun times up and down the Northeast Corridor there on the Amtrak, and being able to pop off and on and see different things, whether in Wilmington or Baltimore, Philadelphia, and so forth and so on. So it's all very convenient. But that's a perfect, really entry point for my presentation. So and Leslie, you may find that my presentation shares some of the backstory, the details that you might have shared yourself. Of course, the details will be different at your institution, but I think my presentation will go and give people a little bit more insight into specifically kind of what the struggles were and how we had to change. And so I'm gonna share my screen. These presentations are presentations that I've been using quite a bit to help the board understand what's been going on at the MAG. Actually, Patty Giordano is the master of this material, and all those of us, all the Gallery Council members, I'm sure know Patty, our COO, who's instrumental in running the operation. Oh, we're a bigger operation, so I'm grateful to have the support of Patty in helping to run the MAG. Size-wise, so you're about $1 million budget. We're normally about $8.5 million budget. At least we're an $8.5 million budget now. When I arrived, it was more like 5.8 million. That was 7 years ago. So the budget has grown over the years. And we have about 55 full-time employees and maybe 75 full-time equivalent when you add up part-time employees as well. So yeah, it's about 8 times or so, 7 times the size, but I know how it works. No more complicated than the Delaware Contemporary, I'm sure, with the programs and the many facets of the organization. So work input. This is more of a little narrative, to give you a sense of how things change for the staff, really, the people who work at the organization. So much had to change. And you know, we of course we closed the building entirely except for a few essential employees, specifically the facilities team, who got a lot of work done while we were out of the building, and did a good bit of repair work, renovation work, repainting, and the facilities team was there on the front edge of the workforce. And once they had cleaned everything really well, they then started taking care of business. In many ways, that was one little silver lining, or one big silver lining, depending on how you look at it, to the COVID experience, is that the facilities team, who really protected and maintained the building during our closure, was there and able to catch up on a lot of important work. But once we reopened, right, and we could invite people back into the building, suddenly guest services, our security ambassadors, our admissions folk, and we all know who they are now. It was Donna DeFord at the time, was head of our visitor services department and team, and now it's Katie Nguyen. Their workload had to have increased by about 500%. I mean, you know, which is a tremendous amount. The rest of us were busy canceling, rescheduling, re-envisioning, you know, every single thing we did, moving it all online, pushing it out, renegotiating the contracts. You know, we have expanded learning collaboration, which is a way in which we engage school children, mainly entirely in the city public school system. Our fundraiser and artist affair clothesline was canceled. You know, we all know, the folks at the Gallery Council know how disastrous this was and how disappointing this was. What is an exhibition, you know, when you can't see it, and then you can, but you can only come at certain hours? What is a preview party? So we tried to figure all of that out. And so this is sort of, you know, we did the work once, in other words, and then you had to do it again, right? And maybe you had to do it a third time. So when we talk about the increase in workload at a time when communication was so much more difficult and absurd or bizarre or strange, however you want to describe living on a computer screen, which we continue to do with the program we're having right now. I mean, that's a silver lining. We can still use Zoom. You know, we can use it to augment the rest of our lives. We may be tired of doing that, but it's there as a tool, a very useful tool. But you know, we had to redo all the work and figure out how to redo all the work and reinvent ourselves on this new platform. And so all meetings internally took place on this platform, and we had to figure out how to partner on this platform. Now, because there was the hope that we would get reimbursed for all these additional expenses, and there were federal grants and all kinds of aid coming from the federal and state governments. We're a part of a much larger organization, the University of Rochester. We're a very small part of it, but I think an important part of it nonetheless. U of R being a huge institution of about 38,000 employees, and you know, whatever it is, a $3.5 billion annual budget, so forth. U of R asked us to track every expense, so that was an additional layer of work. We were hoping to get reimbursed for those expenses. A little bit of insight into the grants. We applied for more than $534,000 worth of grants. We won more than $56,000 in grants. We were ineligible for all of the PPE loans and the forgiven loans, and we lost out probably on well over $1 million in subsidies from the government, because we are part of a larger organization. And even though we're a tub on our own bottom, and you know, we pay our own way in this world, more or less, but for the most part, I think the university covers 10% of our budget, and that's one way to look at it. We'll leave it at that. But we were responsible for the other 90, but that didn't matter. We still weren't eligible for any of those other grants. And we did all of this with less pay. So that's really sad because, and less time, because we had to put people on rolling furloughs. Senior team took 10% salary cut. I took a 20% salary cut. And there was more work to do. We had plans to implement a new customer relationship management system called Altru, which changed the way we work, sort of even more on top of the ways in which our work had changed. We wanted to do Altru, we just didn't want to do it during COVID. It was a pretty awesome, really monumental Herculean undertaking, and still is. We're still learning how to use it. It's a pretty robust software system, but it's quite complicated, but it's going to help us in the long run. But you know, how hard was it to kind of try to figure out how to reinvent the way we relate to our public on top, you know, during COVID, when we were already tasked with reinventing the way we relate to our public. You know, a couple of bits of silver lining. I referred to how wonderful a job the facilities team did in taking care of the facilities, and anybody who sees a facility team member at the MAG, you can always thank them for the great work they did during the closure. But we had these weekly all staff meetings, which were fun and a great way for the team, the larger team, to feel connected. It was supportive, and it was, I think, helpful, and it brought us together in a strange way when it was hard to feel connected to people. Financially, there were very severe impacts. We were able to balance the fiscal year 20 budget, which is when COVID hit and we had to close, by doing a number of things. Number one of which was using cash on hand. People had left us money, and we spent basically all the cash we had on hand. As I mentioned, we took salary cuts, and staff members went on rolling furlough, which means they had to take a certain amount of time off over the course of the year. We eliminated all overtime. Every single expense, whether it was for a roll of Scotch tape or what have you, had to be approved by either me or Patty. For the fiscal 21 year, we just cut out $1.5 million from our $8.5 million budget, and more or less 8.5. So we ended up with a $7.3 million budget. And in fact, the budget had been done, and because the budget gets done in March, and the budget is passed in April for the next fiscal year. And we show up at the finance committee meeting and the board meetings with an $8.5 million budget. And that late in the game, the board said, you gotta take a hard look at this. We don't think this is gonna go well. So within just a short period of time, the amazing Sherry Bergstrom and Patty and others in the finance team, and of course the senior team supported this effort, worked really hard to cut a lot out of the budget and reduce the budget significantly. And here you see again the different ways in which we made changes to the budget and how we were able to reduce the budget. So no cost of living increase. Now there's a new, and look at this last thing, wage compression projects. So in the midst of COVID, the university, which I think was a great thing, decided now is the time to give everybody a raise, because minimum wage is being increased, not federally at this point, but certainly at the state level. New York State is on track to increase its minimum wage over the coming years. And I don't remember where we're at right now, but I think the goal is to get to about $15 an hour. And the university wants to be ahead of that. And they don't want to keep raising the minimum wage at the university in response to every move that the state takes, because it's a tremendous amount of work to change the pay scale of 38,000 employees. So the university says, let's get ahead of this. Let's make a big increase to minimum wage, get ahead of the state's efforts, which is smart, good. The staff is happy about this. Everybody's pleased to be paying their teams more and to be more competitive as an employer. But in the process of doing that, and this gets to what we call wage compression. So if minimum wage, let's see, minimum wage used to be here, okay? And then here's all the people who make more than minimum wage. And then there's the administrative leaders, they make kind of up here, right? But there's a huge band of people who make more than minimum wage and not an executive level income. So this is the band we're talking about in here. So if you raise minimum wage, what happens to all the salaries in that band? Well, there were people who were making the new minimum wage, and now they're just, they were making more than the old minimum wage. So, and now they're making the minimum wage. Does that make sense? And there's people who made a little bit more than them, and they're making just a little bit more than minimum wage. In the old days, they would have made significantly more than minimum wage. So this is called wage compression. So minimum wage used to be here, now it's here, and the band of salaries, say up to $60,000 a year, what have you, something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but just to illustrate the point, gets compressed. This is called wage compression. So you have to kind of reintroduce the space in between the pay grades. And so that's called decompressing the wage, the wages. So not only did people at the lower end of the spectrum get a wage increase to get ahead of the minimum wage increase, every single person at the MAG got a wage except for those making the highest salaries, which was of course a great thing. But now we've taken a tough situation and made it tougher, right? We've then gone and added $150,000 to the salary expenses. And that continues to build because we're adding more. And not only that, the university said, by the way, the university said, going back to this slide, the university is in a pretty good financial position. We got some good funding from the government. Our hospitals are back up and running. We're better than we thought we were going to be. We're getting rid of all furloughs. We're getting rid of all salary reductions. We're getting rid of all sacrifices and compromises that people had to make in order to reduce the salary burden for the university. Everybody at the university was returned to 100% employment. That included the MAG. So we were happy to go along with that. But the challenge is we still weren't getting any revenue, right? Our museum was still closed. People still weren't coming. There still weren't events. So it's this very complicated story about being a part of this large, wonderful institution, but at the same time being responsible for our own financial well-being. And we have to adhere to the larger HR policies and then kind of figure out how to work within that context. So very, very complicated situation. As Leslie said, restrictions negatively impacted our earned revenue. So our gallery capacities were at 25%, creative workshop, our community art school limited 25%, events and programs limited as well. A restaurant, was cut, no indoor dining, only takeout. And you can see that it impacted who came. Those of you will remember prior big holiday season shows, Monet, Mucha, and Warhol. Warhol might have been the biggest of all three of those. Had it been normal times, it was much smaller, a half of what Mucha was, and yet a quarter about of what Monet was. And the same goes for the revenue generation, although I have to say we did pretty well with Warhol. We got revenue, and some revenue is better than no revenue, and that really made a huge difference. So while it wasn't what it should have been, it was nonetheless a bright spot that we did have this bit of revenue. The store was hit hard. The Gallery Council does amazing work in the store. The store right now is so beautiful. It looks fantastic with all of the Rochester Finger Lakes exhibition artists and bringing that exhibition to life in such a wonderful way for shoppers. I mean, the store really advances our mission in some respects, and really in many respects by highlighting the work of artists locally and regionally. But boy, it was hard for the store, right? Who's coming in to go shopping? And the event story, a very sad story. You can see all the revenue we enjoyed during the holiday season shows in the past, and how we lost a tremendous amount of revenue because we were still paying those employees, right? We didn't cut them off. So that was a negative impact. And you can see here how the creative workshop was affected as of December of 2021. Again, a negative impact because the MAG continued to pay its employees, which we thought, of course, it was very important, and we're grateful to have been able to do it. There were a few people who were laid off. There were a lot of rolling furloughs, sacrifices made, but we were able to keep everybody on, which I think was important, was just something, again, that we were grateful to be able to do. Clothesline, there was no clothesline. We were able to get some funding, generous funding for that. What's coming forward this year, 22, next year, 23, it's been slow. The rebound has been slow. The first 6 months of the present fiscal year, which will end in December, the first 6 months will end in December. It's still basically COVID for us, but salaries, everybody's getting paid. The furloughs have ended, and we need to figure out how to pay for the additional 275 plus 150. You're talking about 425, right? 275, 370, 425 of additional expenses and salary, which is now a sort of a good thing to do and a tough thing to figure out how to do. So that's what I spent a good bit of my time figuring out and working on at this point. And that's the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Leslie, Catherine, we can go to the gallery view, would be great. And it's now really about up to us to have our little chat and to invite questions from anybody in the audience. So please do chime in as you wish. But I thought, Leslie, I want to start by asking a question about your presentation, if you don't mind. I really love the banner and the artwork on the outside of your building. And I thought it was very creative and very dynamic and a wonderful way to bring the inside out and to communicate with your public and to engage a broader audience. And that's a very convincing project. What are some of the other ways you identified the unique value of the Delaware Contemporary? It is a very difficult time in that regard. Even the MAG, every art museum finds itself having to re-examine itself in order to be as relevant as it can possibly be to the community. So your challenge is not unlike MAG's, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you are trying to meet that challenge.
Yes, I'm live. So I think that's probably one of our silver linings. We all, I'm sure you all do there as well, take on too much or chase those dollars that kind of lead just to more resource consuming kinds of projects. And so during COVID, I think we took a step back and looked at what is it, because of what I had mentioned in the presentation, what do we do best? And the thing that we do without the collection is that we're very flexible, and we can, change on a dime. We can move quickly, unlike a lot of other organizations in the area. We can put things up really quickly. And so we invited the public of artists to submit applications for 2 different COVID exhibitions. So while they were working in COVID, we did an Instagram project, and then we also did another project that was curated via Instagram with a Philadelphia-based curator, and he brought things in and everyone just shipped it. And so we were able to be really creative with that. The other, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about accountability, but another project that we did that I thought was really interesting in, let's see, sorry about that, in 2020 was we asked the public to respond to, this is the COVID project here. Let me see, am I sharing or not sharing?
Not right now.
Okay, let me share with you.
There you go.
There, this is it's called From Chaos to Order, and that was one of our COVID projects. But what we did in addition is invite the public to come to the museum and respond in our galleries. So this was post, right after the death of George Floyd, right after the Black Lives Matter protests in Wilmington. We were able to change over quickly one of our galleries and open it up and allow people to come in on appointment to paint on the walls, to write on the walls, to integrate with the space in a different way than they normally would expect a museum to allow. So they weren't just looking at art, but they were actually actively, and we let that open all summer last year. So from June until August, we kept this program open and invited conversations that occurred via Instagram and Facebook and all of that, with some of the artists that came in and drew on the walls. And I think having the knowledge that we could be that responsive was something that we really latched onto. And since then, we have done other projects. So for example, this last summer, just summer 2021, we had done a couple of projects, one in particular, this one based on the Crown Act. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Crown Act, but the Crown Act is legislation that first went through the US House and then kind of got stuck there. But in Delaware and in several other states, it prohibits discrimination in the workplace against hair and hair styling. And so in particular, Black hair. And there are so many artists out there that have been addressing this through their work. This is Liz Miller. She's out of DC. Do you know her? She may be somebody you have interacted with in the past. So this show of 14 artists, some of them very visibly expressing what it means to be born with hair that can be discriminated against. And so we took a look in many different ways at this project, and that went up pretty quickly. We did a call for artists. It was a juried exhibition. This is who teaches at the University of Delaware. And that project, again, I think exemplified our ability to kind of move quickly. So the other thing I think that we learned is that we can, like this, be an incubator. The other organizations cannot be an incubator. They're not really set up for people to fail all the time, and we're okay with that. We can be this place where you can come in and maybe it worked for you and maybe it didn't work for you, but you have the support of the institution behind you, at least to make that effort and to move forward. And we realized that was a strength that we also had, was this ability to support emerging artists and to make them feel comfortable from going from A to B, and A to B may be mid-career to professional, or it may be professional to the end of their career, wherever they may fall. I think that is something that we learned that we could do really well. And bringing that back to professionals as well, we've worked so many times with interns and really skilled and talented young creative people. And so put into position over the last 6 months is a new program called residencies. And so we have 2 emerging artists that are in residence for a year, and they get a free studio upstairs, and 1 group of creatives who are curating an exhibition that are here for a year. And they also get a studio and the ability to work with our team to put forth something new. So I think that's kind of where we landed. We landed on keeping our region at 250 miles. We landed on being super flexible, on being the voice in the community that can be responsive to current issues through art, both outside and inside, and then to really be this testing, this experimentation station.
That's great. That's really exciting. Well
Mhm.
done. I love how, I mean, we have, I relate to seeing people at the MAG making art, but it very much is, centered around the creative workshop. And it's also, we just have a new mural on view now by a young artist named Salute, also called, his name is actually Brad Young, or maybe his name is actually Salute and he's also called Brad Young. I'm not exactly sure how he sets it up, but known both ways. But he was working in the space for a number of weeks, but it's very different from what you've done. And how wonderful to have that sense of community around making art for the gallery spaces. And that's unique, really, when you think about how a community can come together. I was thinking how funny it is. I would try to make a joke in my mind about how, oh, the MAG, we get to fail too. But boy, you should see what I hear from the members of the Gallery Council when I fail. No, just kidding. But in any case, well done on all of that. So there really were some silver linings from all of this. Anybody else? And as I said, folks in the audience, if you have any questions and you want to know the inside scoop on how MAG or how another museum director had managed or is managing what's going on, please chime in. Leslie, do you have a question for me?
Well, I do. I have two questions. And one is really around that, back to kind of this accountability. And so for an organization like us, we're, Wilmington is about 65% Black. And,
wow.
we've been asked by the public to really respond to that, make sure our board is reflective of that, make sure that the programs that we're doing. And so we've spent quite a bit of time over the last year really putting into place policies and actions and things like that. And you can see from our exhibitions that we're responding to kind of, current events. And I'm curious as, how it works for an organization that's, got a collection and a university, and a lot of baggage.
It's a great way to put it.
To be responsive, right?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's such an important question. So, right, like a lot of baggage. So, I mean, what percentage of the works in our permanent collection by artists whose names we know, there are plenty of works of art by folk artists, African artists, Native American artists, pre-Columbian artists, ancient artists, objects by artists whose names we do not know.
Mm-hmm.
But what percentage of the works in our collection of those by artists whose names we know were made by white men? It's almost a rhetorical question, but it actually can be answered. I haven't done the research, I haven't done the math, but I've spoken with the curators. We're thinking somewhere between 90 and 95% of those works of art in our collection are by white men. So that means not by women,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we know that women have been making great art for a long time, let alone African-American artists, Latino, Latina, Latinx artists, so forth. And so Asian artists whose names we know. So the list goes on. So when you say baggage, I mean, it's not really baggage, but it is a history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a history, I don't think of it, at least, as a history to be blamed or faulted, because we look a lot like every other museum. We look a lot like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We look a lot like the Art Institute of Chicago and the Cleveland Museum of Art and so forth and so on. We're much smaller, but we look a lot like those institutions. And we also look a lot like those institutions in the sense that while we've done a good job with education and school programs over the years, more than a good job, an excellent job. Certainly when I arrived 7 years ago, the Memorial Art Gallery was already deeply dedicated to serving a broad audience, to bringing in people of color, people from different ethnic and racial backgrounds, a diverse audience. We had family days, we had all these wonderful celebrations, around ethnicity and culture and race. But, you know, was it enough? And did what did what we used to do and is what we're doing now, again, to get to your statement, reflective of the community we are meant to serve. We are a nonprofit organization, part of the University of Rochester, but our goal is to serve the people of Rochester. Our mission, really, our charter says we should serve the people of Rochester. So while we're affiliated with the university, we function primarily as a civic art museum. So that's our responsibility, to serve this civic community, civil society. And a majority of civil society in the city of Rochester is people of color. It's not quite 65%, it's probably closer to 58% people of color, majority of them being African-American, but lots of Latino, Latina, Latinx people. When you get out into the counties and the larger region, Monroe County, or the region which we serve, our demographics look much more like the overall US demographics. So I think people of color are become about 30 some odd percent, and white people are the majority at this point. It's going to change overall, and I think in not too long from now, 2040 is the year when the entire country will be majority, minority, as they say, are people of color. So the real question becomes, let's take a very close look at how we are serving our community, and are we fairly serving the community, equitably serving the community? Do we welcome a proper or appropriate, let's say, percentage of people of color relative to within the context of our larger audience? Are we showing art by fairly by those measures, not only in terms of who made the work, but in terms of the images in the work itself as well? Are our programs reaching a well-diversified audience? Are we collecting a diversified body of art? Is our board made up of an appropriately diverse group of people, and as well with our staff? So those are really the 5 pillars as I see them: staff, board, leadership, permanent collection, temporary programs and special exhibitions, and then finally the audience. So we have now a set of web pages dedicated to measuring this. It's not so much we haven't like signed an agreement and made promises. That's not the way we have approached things to date. Where we're really focused, what we're really focused on right now is being entirely transparent about who we are and what we do and what we have, so that we know who we are. Because I don't think we've taken a very good look at ourselves in a sense. Like, so when I say, oh, collection is roughly 95% by white men, you know, we could be more precise in that. And we could be more precise in who makes up our board and more precise in who makes up our staff. So if you go to our website now and click on, I think the home square tile says, "We stand against racism." And you click through that, you'll get to a series of pages about the staff and the board where we go deep. I mean, how many LGBTQ plus people are on our board, on our staff? People with ADA, official ADA limitations as defined by the government are on our board and on our staff. So we wanted to understand who we are. And we want, and you can also click through to see what the county is made up of in terms of the people who make up the county. So you can now compare. And not only that, you can say, oh, we're X percentage people of color at the MAG. Hey, that's a pretty high percentage, but you can go now through department and you can see that all of the curatorial team is white women. and more, in facilities, it's more diverse, or among the security ambassadors or the visitor services team, it's more diverse, or the financial back of house accounting business management team, more diverse, less diverse in other areas of the museum. So you can actually see where we are less and more diverse, and you can understand that we need to do better in curatorial, or we need to do better in these specific areas. Because as we know, with the way the world works, that people of color are generally more likely to have the lower paying jobs in an art museum setting. And we can talk about why that is, but that's a much larger story. So we wanted to just be as transparent as possible. So the next piece to this website that's going up is going to be a story about the permanent collection. It's going to be really interesting to see, learn about what art we've acquired over the past 7 years and what's its racial, ethnic, demographic makeup. And we're doing this for our temporary programs and exhibitions, and we're doing this for our audience. So once we go through all of those, each one is a pretty extensive study and it's taking a lot of time. But as you know, then we're going to go back through it every year thereafter to see how we change and improve and better compare, reflect the percentages that we feel we ought to be reflecting. And I want to add that there's a lot more on the website. There's a whole list of resources that the board has been engaged with in terms of the work that the board is doing. There's a list of resources that the staff has used to have conversations. What work has the staff been doing to expand, to grow, to strengthen its culture? The same with the board. Who are we talking to? What are we reading? What exercises are we engaged in? So that information is there. I'm really, I should say, I suppose, proud of the work that the staff has done. It's very important work to the team. I mean, we just finished an all-staff workshop. You know, there were concerns about the staff registered some complaints. Really fantastic to get the feedback. How could we have done it better? We're going to do another one soon. We're going to make it better. You know, consistently having this conversation is strengthening the MAG and making the MAG essentially a more welcoming place for people, whether to work or to volunteer at, or to attend. And that's what it's all about, being a place where a wide variety of people want to be, or where a wide variety of people want to have relationships with. Because we have to get ahead of this. We have to do better. We have to build a stronger institution for the future, because we know the future, we know what it's going to be. It's going to be dealing with climate change, that's for sure. And it's going to be a much more complicated, complex, diverse, rich, I would say, a populace here in the United States. It's just not going to look the way it looks now. It's not going to look the way it did when the MAG was founded. So in order to be a stronger institute, I mean, we talk about this as being the right thing to do, but it's in part, it's the right thing to do in part, because if we don't do it, we're not gonna be here. You know, we're going to be irrelevant to the people who live in this region. And that is something that we have to be, like you said earlier, you used the word relevant. I mean, we have to be relevant, because if we're not relevant, we're not going to matter. If we don't matter, then people aren't going to love us. And if people don't love us, then, we could go away. And,
right.
And that's not going to happen on my watch. And it's not the future that I'm building and working with others to build for this institution.
Well, it sounds like you've got a good start, especially just knowing all of that data. I mean, that's a huge amount of work just to pull together and understand that. And I think it proves explicitly that you're transparent, like you said, and that you know what's going on there. You're not blind to what's happening behind the scenes. You're very much in touch with what's going on. So that's good. It looks like we're getting close, Jonathan.
We are. It is 12 o'clock. Our time is up. I hope that the Q&A tab function worked. Who knows? Sometimes the technology doesn't deliver, in which case we apologize. But it would appear that no questions came through, so that's okay. Clearly, Leslie and I felt like we had plenty to talk about. Catch up. Nice to see you and talk with you again, Leslie. I want to say a few really important words before we say goodbye, if you don't mind, Leslie. First, thank you very much for joining us in Rochester via
Come
Zoom.
visit. Come down. Wilmington.
Okay, I will. All the way from Delaware, all the way from Wilmington. It's lovely to have you here with us. Catherine Page, who spearheaded this particular program, Julie Reynolds, who has been working on programs for the Gallery Council this year. Catherine Yarger, always there to help with a smile on her face, very kindly, very generously supporting the work of the Gallery Council. Bonnie Vole, thank you for your leadership as president. I'm enjoying working with you. I'm enjoying having you on the MAG board. It's really a pleasure to be able to work with you. I've enjoyed working with all my Gallery Council presidents and you just as well. And to the Gallery Council, keep up the great work. You know, you stuck with us during COVID. You're sticking with us now. You're so passionate about the MAG. You love the MAG. You support the MAG. You work so hard. The Gallery Store is one of the many ways you work hard. Arts and Treasures is coming up. You do a lot and you make a huge difference in the life of the Memorial Art Gallery. So our largest single annual donor is the Gallery Council. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a great day. Leslie, I'm sure you agree. You would reiterate that. You hope everybody has a great day, right?
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I wish that we had more time.
Yeah, likewise. All right, be well,
Talk
everybody.
soon,
Oh,
and
thanks.
we welcome all of you down, Wilmington.
All right. Sorry, Sue Nolan. We'll catch you up in person on the Finger Lakes exhibition. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.